Victoria leaned back in her chair, sipping her evening wine as the soft glow of the fireplace cast flickering shadows across the pristine living room. From the outside, her life appeared flawless. A spacious home in the suburbs, a luxury car in the driveway, and a husband who was both successful and attractive. It was the kind of life people envied. Alex, her husband of 7 years, was everything she thought she wanted when they met. Driven, dependable, and kind. Yet, as the years passed, his ambition began to overshadow his presence in their marriage. His work as a high-powered attorney consumed his days and nights, leaving Victoria to navigate the silence of their increasingly empty home. It wasn't that she didn't love him. She told herself this every day. It was just, something was missing. The spark, the connection, the laughter that used to fill their evenings had dwindled to perfunctory conversations about schedules and bills. Tonight, as Alex sat hunched over his laptop at the dining table, murmuring about an upcoming case, Victoria found herself watching him with a strange mix of longing and resentment. He was there, but he wasn't present. "Do you even remember the last time we had a proper date night?" she asked, breaking the silence. Alex looked up, his expression blank for a moment before he forced a tired smile. "I know, Vic. I've just been swamped. How about this weekend? I'll clear my schedule." She nodded, though she knew better than to believe him. This wasn't the first time he'd made that promise. Later that night, as Alex fell asleep almost instantly beside her, Victoria lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The rhythm of his breathing was steady, predictable, just like their life. And yet, deep inside her, a restlessness stirred. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of the end of their perfect illusion. The following weekend came and went without a date night. Alex had canceled yet again, citing a sudden work emergency. By Sunday evening, Victoria found herself scrolling aimlessly through her phone, seeking distraction. It was then that she noticed an ad for a local dance studio offering expressive movement workshops. She lingered on the post, captivated by the image of a couple dancing, their bodies entwined in perfect harmony. Dancing. She hadn't danced since her college days, and even then, it had been a fleeting passion. A hobby she'd abandoned when life became too busy. Without thinking too much, she booked a trial session for the following Tuesday. She didn't tell Alex. When Tuesday arrived, Victoria felt a mix of excitement and apprehension as she walked into the studio. The scent of polished wood and faint traces of incense filled the air. A small group of people were stretching and chatting, but her attention was drawn to the man standing at the front of the room. Daniel. He was tall, with an athletic build and a quiet charisma that seemed to command the room effortlessly. His dark eyes held a mischievous glint, and his easy smile made it impossible not to feel at ease. "First time?" he asked as she approached, his voice warm and inviting. "Yes," she admitted, feeling unexpectedly shy. "Well, you're in the right place. Dance is freedom. It's about expressing what words can't," he said, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. Victoria felt her cheeks flush as she nodded, her restlessness momentarily forgotten. The session was exhilarating. Daniel's instructions were clear, his movements fluid and magnetic. He guided the class with a blend of discipline and humor, his voice echoing with encouragement. When he partnered with Victoria to demonstrate a move, his touch was firm yet gentle, his proximity sending a thrill through her that she hadn't felt in years. As the session ended and the group began to disperse, Daniel approached her. "You've got a natural grace," he said, smiling. "I hope you'll come back. You've got potential." Victoria smiled back, her heart racing. "I think I will." That night, as she returned home to find Alex asleep in his study, the glow of his laptop illuminating his weary face, Victoria felt something she hadn't in years. Anticipation. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she had a feeling she might have just found it. Victoria became a regular at the studio. At first, it was just once a week, but soon she found herself drawn back more often, craving the rhythm of the music, the elegance of the movements, and, most of all, the presence of Daniel. The dance sessions were more than just exercise. They were an escape. Each time she stepped onto the studio floor, she left behind the dull monotony of her life. Daniel's energy was infectious, and his compliments came often, always laced with a subtle charm that sent shivers down her spine. "Your form is improving," he remarked one evening as they practiced a close-hold sequence. His hands rested lightly on her waist, guiding her movements. "You're really letting yourself go. That's where the magic happens." Victoria laughed nervously, feeling the heat of his touch linger even as he stepped back. She told herself it was harmless. He was just a good teacher, and she was simply enjoying her lessons. But then there were the moments in between. The way his eyes lingered on hers when she caught him looking. The way he leaned in just a little too close when he corrected her posture. The way his hand would brush hers, lingering longer than necessary. After a particularly intense session, Daniel invited Victoria to stay behind and practice a new routine he was choreographing. The studio was dimly lit, the other students long gone. "This one's a bit more intimate," he explained, moving to stand behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, their reflections aligning in the mirror before them. "It's all about trust and connection. You have to feel it, not just perform it." She nodded, her breath catching as his hands slid down her arms, guiding her movements. They swayed together, their bodies perfectly synchronized. The music swelled, and for a brief moment, the world outside the studio ceased to exist. When the routine ended, they stood still, their breathing heavy. Daniel didn't move away. Instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're incredible, Victoria," he murmured. Her heart raced as his words hung in the air. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Before she could stop herself, she stepped closer, her pulse pounding in her ears. And then, as if pulled by an invisible force, their lips met. The kiss was brief, hesitant, but it sent a jolt through her that left her breathless. As they pulled away, Daniel's expression was unreadable. I should go," Victoria stammered, grabbing her bag and fleeing the studio before he could respond. On the drive home, guilt and exhilaration battled within her. She told herself it had been a mistake, a lapse in judgment. But deep down, she knew she would go back. The next few days were a whirlwind of confusion for Victoria. She avoided the studio, unsure of how to face Daniel after what had happened. Yet, no matter how much she tried to distract herself, the memory of their kiss haunted her. His touch, his intensity, the rush of adrenaline that coursed through her veins. By the end of the week, her resolve crumbled. She returned to the studio, telling herself it was just to dance, to clear her mind. When she arrived, Daniel was waiting. His usual easy smile was absent, replaced by an expression of quiet determination. "I wasn't sure if you'd come back," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. He gestured toward the studio floor. "Shall we?" The session was different. There was an intensity in the way they moved together, a tension that neither could ignore. Every step, every spin, every touch felt electric, charged with unspoken words and forbidden emotions. When the class ended, the other students filtered out, leaving Victoria and Daniel alone again. She gathered her things quickly, avoiding his gaze, but as she turned to leave, he called out to her. "Victoria, wait." She stopped, her heart pounding. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," he confessed, stepping closer. "What happened between us? It wasn't just a mistake, at least not for me." She looked at him, torn between desire and guilt. "Daniel, I'm married." "I know," he said, his voice soft, "but I see the way you look at me. I feel it when we dance. Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll never bring it up again." For a moment, she considered lying, denying the pull she felt toward him. But the truth was undeniable. "You're not wrong," she whispered. That was all it took. In the dim light of the studio, they gave in to the passion that had been simmering between them for weeks. Their kisses were urgent, their movements frantic as they sought to claim the moment they had both been craving. When it was over, they lay tangled in each other's arms on the studio floor, the reality of what they'd done beginning to sink in. I shouldn't have. Victoria began, pulling away. Daniel caught her hand, his expression serious. I don't regret it. Do you? She hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I don't know. That night, as she returned home to find Alex asleep in their bed, the weight of her actions pressed down on her. She told herself it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness that wouldn't happen again. But deep down, she knew the line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Victoria woke the next morning to find Alex already gone. A note on the kitchen counter. Early meeting. Dinner tonight. She stared at the note, her heart heavy with guilt. Alex was trying in his own way, but the memory of Daniel's touch still lingered, vivid and consuming. She resolved to put it all behind her. One mistake didn't define her, and she wouldn't let it spiral into something worse. She could still salvage her marriage, she told herself. But as the days turned into weeks, avoiding Daniel became impossible. He texted her once, then twice. The messages were simple, checking in, asking if she was coming to class, but she could feel the weight behind them. When she finally returned to the studio, their chemistry reignited instantly. Despite her efforts to keep their relationship professional, it wasn't long before they found themselves alone again after a session, unable to resist the pull between them. It wasn't just the physical connection. Daniel listened to her in a way Alex hadn't in years. He asked about her dreams, her frustrations, her fears. He made her feel alive, seen, and desired in a way that had long been missing from her life. As their affair deepened, so did the lies. Victoria began crafting elaborate excuses for her absences. Late meetings, yoga classes, errands that took longer than expected. Each lie came easier than the last. Alex, absorbed in his work, didn't question her explanations. But cracks began to form in her facade. One evening, Alex noticed her phone buzzing with a text message from Daniel while she was in the shower. The name on the screen was innocuous enough, Dan Dance. But Alex's curiosity was piqued. He didn't confront her then. Instead, he began paying closer attention to her behavior. The way she suddenly seemed energized after being out, the new clothes she'd bought, the faint trace of cologne on her scarf that wasn't his. Victoria, oblivious to his suspicions, continued her double life. The thrill of her affair with Daniel was intoxicating, but so was the sense of danger, the risk of being caught. She convinced herself that she had everything under control, that Alex would never find out. But she underestimated him. Late one night, as she slipped into bed after another late yoga class, Alex lay awake beside her, his eyes open in the darkness. He wasn't angry yet, but he was watching, waiting, and piecing together the web of lies she had spun around him. And Victoria had no idea the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Alex's suspicions began to solidify into something undeniable. Victoria had left the house, saying she was meeting a friend for lunch. Alex, who rarely had free weekends, decided to use the time to organize their home office. As he moved piles of papers and old receipts, a brightly colored slip caught his eye, an invoice from the dance studio. He frowned. Victoria had mentioned taking up yoga, not dancing. He examined the receipt more closely and noticed it was dated several weeks ago. Setting the slip aside, Alex's mind raced. Could this explain her recent behavior? The new clothes, her glowing demeanor, the constant excuses? He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something didn't feel right. Later that evening, he casually brought it up over dinner. "How was your lunch?" he asked, keeping his tone light. "It was great," Victoria replied, sipping her wine. "We went to that little Italian place on Main Street." "Sounds nice," Alex said. He paused, then added, "By the way, I found a receipt for a dance studio earlier. Are you taking dance classes now?" Victoria's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She quickly recovered, setting it down and smiling. "Oh yeah, I signed up a while ago. Just thought it'd be a fun way to stay active." Alex nodded, not letting his expression betray him. "That's great. I didn't know you were interested in dancing again." "It's nothing serious," she said quickly. a hint of nervousness in her voice. Just something to pass the time. Alex let the conversation drop, but inside, his doubts grew. That night, while Victoria was in the shower, he decided to do something he'd never done before. Check her phone. It wasn't locked, and as he scrolled through her messages, a thread labeled Dan Dance caught his attention. The messages were seemingly innocent at first, questions about class schedules and feedback on routines. But as he scrolled further, the tone changed. I can't stop thinking about last night. You're incredible, Victoria. I've never felt this way before. When can I see you again? I miss you. Alex's chest tightened as he read the messages. There was no mistaking the nature of their relationship. He put the phone back exactly as he'd found it, his mind reeling. The betrayal was worse than he had imagined. But instead of confronting her immediately, Alex made a decision. He would gather more proof. And then, when the time was right, he would make her pay for every lie, every deceitful moment. Victoria had no idea that her carefully constructed web of lies was about to unravel in the most devastating way. The discovery of the messages pushed Alex into a state of cold determination. He was no longer the loving, patient husband Victoria had grown used to. Now, he was a man on a mission, carefully plotting his next steps. He knew that a confrontation without solid proof could lead to denial, deflection, or even manipulation. He wanted Victoria to have no escape when the moment of reckoning came. The next day, while Victoria was out, Alex installed a small, discreet camera in their bedroom. He placed it high on a shelf behind a decorative vase, ensuring it was nearly invisible. If her betrayal had crossed into their home, he would have concrete evidence. His heart ached as he worked, the very act of setting up the camera a betrayal of his own values. But in his mind it was justified. She had broken their trust first. For a week, Alex said nothing. He acted as though everything was normal, smiling at her over breakfast, asking about her day, and even suggesting they go out for dinner one evening. Victoria seemed relieved, even happy, that he was making an effort again. But behind his calm exterior, Alex was a storm of emotions. Every evening, he checked the footage from the camera, dreading what he might find. On the third day, his fears were confirmed. It was late in the evening. Victoria had come home from her dance class unusually dressed up. After a quick shower, she slipped into lingerie, a rare occurrence lately, and dimmed the lights. Not long after, the front door opened, and Alex's blood ran cold as Daniel stepped into their bedroom. The two embraced passionately, their movements unguarded and shameless. Alex watched in stunned silence, a mix of rage and heartbreak coursing through him. He could have confronted them right then and there, but he didn't. Instead, he let the footage play out, every second hardening his resolve. This wasn't just a fling or a moment of weakness. It was deliberate, premeditated, and brazen. The next day, Alex began putting his plan into motion. He didn't just want to confront Victoria. He wanted to dismantle the world she had built on lies. He started with Daniel, discreetly gathering information about him, his work, his reputation, and anything that could be used as leverage. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous his plan became. Victoria, oblivious to his discovery, continued her affair, believing she had everything under control. But Alex was no longer the passive, distracted husband she thought he was. He was a man waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The tension in Alex's mind reached a breaking point the day he reviewed the most recent footage. Daniel had not only become comfortable in Alex's home but had left small signs of his presence. A misplaced book on the nightstand, a faint trace of cologne on the sheets. This was no longer just an affair. It was an invasion. That evening, as Victoria returned home, Alex greeted her with his usual smile, but there was an icy undertone to his demeanor. "You're home early," Victoria remarked, setting her bag down. "I thought I'd surprise you," Alex said, his voice calm but hollow. "Actually, I've been thinking we should host a dinner. Invite some new faces over." Victoria's eyes widened slightly. "Oh? Like who?" Alex's smile tightened. "I was thinking maybe your dance instructor. Daniel, right? You've spoken so highly of him." Victoria froze for a moment before forcing a laugh. I don't think that's necessary. He's just my teacher. Don't be modest, Alex said, his tone growing sharper. You've been spending so much time with him. I'd like to meet the man who's had such an impact on you. Her heart raced as she searched for an excuse, but Alex didn't give her a chance. Why don't you invite him over tomorrow evening? I'll handle the cooking. Victoria nodded hesitantly, her mind scrambling for a way out. She thought about calling Daniel, warning him, but Alex's calm, calculating demeanor left her unsure of what he truly knew. The next evening, Daniel arrived at the house, his charm on full display. Alex greeted him warmly, shaking his hand with a grip that lingered just a bit too long. Welcome, Alex said, his voice carrying a subtle edge. I've heard so much about you. Dinner began awkwardly, with Alex steering the conversation with unsettling precision. He asked Daniel about his career, his personal life, and his philosophy on trust and relationships. It's the foundation of everything, isn't it? Alex said, fixing Daniel with a pointed look. Without trust, nothing works. Marriage, business, friendships. Wouldn't you agree? Daniel nodded uneasily, while Victoria fidgeted with her glass of wine. As dessert was served, Alex leaned back in his chair, his gaze shifting between them. I have a confession to make, he said, his voice dropping. Victoria's stomach twisted. I already know you, Alex said to Daniel, his calm tone laced with menace. And I know what you've been doing. The room fell silent. Daniel glanced at Victoria, whose face had gone pale. Alex rose from his seat and placed a USB drive on the table. I have everything. Every meeting, every lie, every moment you two thought you were alone. It's all here. Victoria gasped, her hands trembling. Alex, please. Save it, he snapped, his calm facade cracking. He turned to Daniel. I hope you enjoyed yourself, because your career is about to collapse. I've sent this to your studio, your clients, and your family. Daniel's face turned ashen. You can't. Oh, I can, Alex said coldly. And as for you, Victoria... He leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. You've destroyed everything we built. Now, I'm going to destroy you. Victoria stared at him, tears streaming down her face. She had underestimated Alex, and now she was at the mercy of a man whose heart she had shattered. But the night was far from over. Alex had only just begun. The silence after Alex's revelation was suffocating. Victoria and Daniel sat frozen at the dining table, their faces pale and tense, while Alex leaned back in his chair, sipping his wine as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Shall we continue? Alex said, gesturing to the untouched dessert on their plates. His calm demeanor was unnerving, his smile sharp as a knife. I think I should go, Daniel muttered, pushing back his chair. You'll leave when I say you can, Alex said, his voice cold and commanding. Daniel stopped mid-movement, his eyes darting to Victoria for support. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but Alex cut her off. Don't bother. There's nothing you can say that I want to hear right now. He turned his gaze to Daniel. You think you can just waltz into another man's home, into his life, and take what isn't yours? Alex, please, Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. Quiet, Alex snapped, his mask of calm slipping for the first time. He took a deep breath, regaining his composure. No, I want to hear from him. Tell me, Daniel, was it worth it? Risking everything for a married woman? Daniel swallowed hard, his usual confidence shattered. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Alex laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Didn't mean for it? You thought what? This would stay your little secret forever? That I wouldn't notice my wife sneaking around? He stood and began pacing slowly around the room, his movements deliberate. The thing about lies, he said, his tone almost conversational, is that they always unravel eventually, and when they do, someone always pays the price. Victoria couldn't hold back her tears any longer.
Alex, I'm sorry.
Stop, he said, his voice rising. Don't you dare sit there and cry like you're the victim in this. You made your choices. You both did. Daniel tried again to stand. Look, I'll leave. I'll stay out of your lives. Just don't ruin me. Alex turned to him, his expression dark. Oh, you think this is about ruining you? No, Daniel. This is about justice. You walked into my house, my life, and took what wasn't yours. Now you're going to face the consequences. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone, holding it up for them to see. This has a live feed of the footage I've sent out. One press of a button, and it's distributed to everyone you know, Daniel. Your clients, your family, your friends. Daniel's face turned white. You can't. Alex smirked. I already have. Victoria stared at her husband, her chest tight with panic. She had known Alex as a calm, rational man, but this side of him, this calculating, vengeful persona, was someone she didn't recognize. I'll give you a head start, Alex said, his tone icy. Run. Leave this house. Because when you're out that door, Daniel, your life as you know it is over. Daniel hesitated for a moment before bolting, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The front door slammed, leaving Victoria and Alex alone in a silence that was almost unbearable. Victoria reached out, her voice shaking. Alex, please, let's talk. But Alex held up a hand to stop her. Don't. You've said enough. He walked past her, his movements deliberate, and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Victoria to sit alone at the table, her world crumbling around her. The storm was far from over, but for now, the house was eerily calm, like the eye of a hurricane waiting to unleash its fury. The following days were a blur for Victoria. Alex barely spoke to her, moving through the house like a ghost. She tried to reach out, to explain, but every attempt was met with cold indifference or a cutting remark that left her more broken than before. Her thoughts raced, oscillating between guilt, fear, and desperation. She couldn't bear the silence, the unknown of what Alex might do next. She had betrayed him, yes, but the man now living in their home wasn't the Alex she once knew. On a cold Friday evening, Alex finally broke his silence. We're hosting another dinner, he announced, setting down a sheet of paper on the kitchen counter. Victoria frowned, picking up the paper. It was a printed email invitation addressed to several of their mutual friends, some of Alex's colleagues, and, to her horror, Daniel. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. It's exactly what it looks like, Alex replied calmly. A gathering to clear the air, so to speak. Alex, you can't be serious, she said, panic rising in her chest. Oh, I'm very serious, he said, his tone sharp. Daniel will be there. You will sit through it. And everyone will know exactly who you are, Victoria. Her hands shook as she set the paper down. You don't have to do this. Please, let's just talk. We're past talking, Alex interrupted, his eyes cold. You made your choice, and now it's time for the consequences. She stared at him, her heart sinking. This wasn't about salvaging their marriage or even finding closure. This was about humiliation, about Alex tearing her down piece by piece. Victoria spent the next few days in a haze of dread, wondering what Alex had planned for the dinner. She considered calling Daniel to warn him, but every time she reached for her phone, she hesitated. He hadn't reached out since fleeing their home, and she couldn't bring herself to drag him back into the mess she had created. The night of the dinner arrived, and Victoria dressed in silence, her hands trembling as she applied her makeup. She barely recognized the woman in the mirror, a shadow of the confident, self-assured person she once was. Guests began to arrive, filling the house with laughter and chatter. To an outsider, it was a perfectly normal gathering. But Victoria felt like she was walking into a trap, every sound and movement amplified by her anxiety. When Daniel finally arrived, her heart stopped. He looked nervous, his usual charm replaced by a wary tension. He avoided her gaze as Alex greeted him with a handshake and an unervingly polite smile. Welcome, Daniel, Alex said, his tone almost cheerful. I'm so glad you could join us tonight. We've got a lot to talk about. The dinner began, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. Victoria barely touched her food, her eyes darting between Alex and Daniel, waiting for the moment the facade would shatter. And then, as the plates were cleared and the wine was poured, Alex raised his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice commanding the room. "To honesty, to trust, and to the secrets we keep from those we claim to love." The room fell silent, and Victoria's stomach dropped. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, their confusion and curiosity palpable. "Victoria," Alex said, turning his gaze to her, "why don't you start? Tell everyone how you've been spending your evenings." The words hung in the air like a loaded gun, and Victoria realized, with a sickening clarity, that Alex's plan was far from over. The room plunged into a suffocating silence as Alex's words echoed, his sharp gaze fixed on Victoria. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her mind racing for a way to respond. "I don't know what you mean," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex smiled, a cold, calculating grin. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the USB drive, holding it up for the room to see. "Let me help you then," he said smoothly. He walked over to the large television mounted on the wall and inserted the drive into a connected device. "Alex, don't," Victoria pleaded, her voice breaking. "Oh, but I must," he replied, his tone dripping with venom. "The truth deserves an audience." The screen flickered to life, and the room's attention shifted. At first, the footage was innocuous, a shot of Victoria entering their bedroom, tidying up. Then came the unmistakable sound of a door opening, and Daniel appeared on the screen. The gasps around the table were audible as the video played, revealing the intimate betrayal in stark detail. Daniel buried his head in his hands, while Victoria sat frozen, her face pale and streaked with tears. "You son of a—" Daniel hissed, standing abruptly, but Alex cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Sit down," Alex commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't get to make demands in my house." Daniel hesitated, his face flushed with shame and anger, before reluctantly sitting back down. Alex turned to the stunned guests, his voice calm but seething with contempt. "Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted you all here tonight to witness what real betrayal looks like. My wife, this woman I've loved, supported, and trusted, decided that wasn't enough. So she brought him into our lives." Victoria tried to speak, her words tumbling out in incoherent fragments. "Alex, it's not please save it," Alex snapped, his composure cracking for the first time. "Do you think your excuses matter now? Look around you, Victoria. These are the people who believed in you, who thought they knew you. Now they see the truth." The guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering among themselves, others too stunned to speak. "Alex, I'll leave," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "You don't need to do this to her." "Oh, Daniel," Alex said, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "You're not walking away unscathed. Your studio already has this footage. Your clients, your friends, your family. They'll all know what kind of man you are." Victoria turned to Alex, her tears flowing freely. "You've made your point. Please, stop this." But Alex wasn't finished. "Stop? You want mercy after everything you've done?"
No, Victoria.
"You don't get to choose when this ends. That's my decision now." He turned to the guests once more. "Feel free to leave if this makes you uncomfortable. But remember, betrayal doesn't just happen in silence. Sometimes it's loud, messy, and devastating. Just like this." One by one, the guests began to stand, their faces etched with discomfort and pity. As they filed out, Daniel quietly slipped away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Victoria remained seated, her head bowed, unable to meet Alex's gaze. When the last guest had left, Alex stood in front of her, his voice cold and detached. "We're done," he said simply. "I'll have the papers drawn up by Monday. You'll leave this house, and you'll take nothing but your shame with you." Victoria looked up at him, her expression hollow. "Alex, don't," he interrupted, his eyes blazing. "You made your choice. Now live with it." With that, He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the dimly lit dining room, the echoes of her betrayal reverberating in the emptiness around her. As the door slammed shut behind the last guest, the house fell eerily silent. Victoria remained at the table, trembling, while Alex stood in the doorway, his face shadowed. "You think this is over?" he asked, his voice low and venomous. Victoria looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with dread. "Alex, please."
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Alex laughed bitterly. "You don't even know what that word means." He stepped forward, pulling out a phone and scrolling through the footage. "This isn't just about the affair. This is about taking back control. And you've left me with no choice." Victoria's breath caught as she saw him type a command into the phone. "What are you doing?" "Finishing this," he said, pressing send. Within minutes, Victoria's phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages flooded in. Friends, family, colleagues, all reacting to the video Alex had just shared. Her face went pale as she realized the magnitude of his revenge. "You didn't." "Oh, I did," Alex said coldly. "The world deserves to see who you really are." Victoria collapsed onto the floor, sobbing as her phone continued to buzz relentlessly. Her carefully constructed life was unraveling before her eyes. Alex loomed over her. "And Daniel? He'll lose everything too. His career, his reputation, it's all gone." "You're a monster," she whispered, her voice broken. "No, Victoria," Alex said, his tone calm. "You created this monster." In the days that followed, Victoria's life descended into chaos. Friends cut ties, her job placed her on indefinite leave, and whispers followed her wherever she went. Daniel, true to Alex's promise, lost his position at the studio and faced a barrage of public humiliation. Victoria tried reaching out to Alex, but every attempt was met with silence. He had disappeared from her life as thoroughly as he had destroyed it. She found herself alone in the ruins of her once perfect world, unsure of how to rebuild. Months later, Victoria sat alone in a dingy apartment, far from the life she once knew. On a rainy evening, a package arrived at her door. Inside was a single red dance shoe and a note. "Some betrayals never fade. Neither will this." She stared at the shoe, tears streaming down her face. Alex's revenge had left scars that would never heal, a cruel reminder of the life she had lost. In the end, there was no redemption, only the echoes of what once was and the emptiness of what remained.